Hello, and welcome to the Managing Your Career webinar, brought to you by the Management Special Interest Group of the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. My name is Ian Joesbury, and I'm President-elect of the IMechE. I'm also a Director at Venn Digital Limited, a leading consultancy specialising in business cost. I've worked within automotive, chemicals, aerospace and technology environments in a wide range of roles. As President of Meggitt Polymers and Composites, I led a 2,000 people in an international business with a turnover of around £180 million. The topics we'll cover today are the IMechE Management Group, individuality, taking ownership, education and training, continuing professional development, people, project and financial management, and finally, I will talk about the need for you to seize the opportunity. We'll finish with any questions you may have. The Management Group's aim is to benefit society by shaping the future of engineering leadership and management. We want to inspire future leaders, provide practical support, share best practice, and promote excellence in engineering leadership. We provide a series of lectures, webinars, and events aimed at supporting these aims. Please feel free to join our LinkedIn group. Search for Management Group-IMechE, where you can start conversations covering any leadership topic and hopefully get advice and opinions from other members of the group that may help you negotiate your way through a complex environment. That's enough of the advertising. Let's hit the first of the main topics, individuality. It goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. You are an individual, so what will work for me might not work for you. That doesn't mean what I'm about to say is worthless, though. I've tried to draw out some principles from experiences in my career that I think will be of value to anyone thinking about their career. Take on board the messages in this webinar and learn from what others have done and experienced, but then put them in the context of your aspirations and your strengths. Tailor it to you. So listen to this webinar and pick out the bits that you think are relevant and put them in your frame of reference. Think about what you want to achieve and what your capabilities are, and start to develop your unique plan for being successful. One of the things you can do to help your planning is to look around you. Who are the people in the roles that you aspire to? Or who are the people that are role models for you and you may want to be like? Find out what path they have taken in their career. Is there something they've done in their career that you can learn from and adapt to your career? I know one of the things that I did was look at the qualifications of people in the roles I aspired to. What I found out was that many of them had done MBAs, Masters in Business Administration. So I concluded that this was a worthwhile thing to put in my plan. So at an appropriate point, I did my MBA full-time at Warwick University. Have a plan, but be flexible though. Few of us can forecast what opportunities might present themselves in the future, and it's all about timing. Doing something like an MBA or an MSc can be a thing that you are in control of, but drop it into your career at a time that best suits your development and be flexible. You don't want to be too rigid about the timing and potentially miss out on a great opportunity to enhance your capabilities in an interesting and challenging role. Taking ownership. There are only three things, in my view, you need to be successful: opportunity, capability, and determination. Determination is down to you. Don't expect the world to spoon feed you. Knuckle down and work hard to get what you want. It's important to recognize that this is a competitive environment out there. Even if everyone around you is very polite and friendly, don't be misled. If you look at any organization, the more senior the role, the fewer the people there are at that level. So to be successful in your career, you need to see it as competition and work out how you can make yourself stand out in a good way. So be determined, be tenacious, have confidence in your own ability, and work hard to achieve results, even if that means having to put in extra discretionary effort. But if you are doing a lot of extra work, make sure that your leadership know about it. If they're unaware of what you're doing, there's a risk it'll go unnoticed, at least in the short term. So make sure that you shout about it, But again, try not to come across as arrogant. Do it in a more subtle way so that at least they definitely know what you've been doing, but it's not seen as though you're trying to self-promote. Also, I hate to say this, but don't expect your manager to motivate you. I am very sorry to say, but many managers are pretty awful at motivation and leadership, especially when I look at engineering and manufacturing environments. This is because people skills are not always the criteria for promotion. And often managers with a strong technical background need to do more work on their people skills. The only person that loses out if you don't motivate yourself, though, is you. So don't fall into the trap of blaming someone else. Look inward for the determination to motivate yourself and drive yourself forward. Capability you can work on. Think about your skills, perhaps what training courses might help develop those skills, but also try and put yourself into roles where you will learn those skills on the job. Learning by doing is one of the most effective ways of learning, so make the most of the opportunities that present themselves. Opportunity, now that really is the big one. So many people walk blindly past great opportunities without even seeing them. Every problem, every absence of leadership, every time that roles and responsibilities are unclear is an opportunity. In most organizations, a small number of people make things happen. They're surrounded by people who are also there, but frankly, are just making up the numbers. Learn to spot the opportunities and take ownership. Become one of those people that can be relied upon to make a difference. If you do, then career opportunities will follow. Maybe not immediately, don't expect to receive immediate accolades or promotions, but over time, your contribution will be recognized and it will make a difference. As a manager, I want to surround myself with those people that make things happen. And they're the ones that take ownership. Education and training. Be thirsty for knowledge, but think about what training you might need to meet your career aspirations. There are plenty of places that you can find that. There are in-company training courses, but there's also training available from the IMechE and many other sources. Topics might include self-awareness, team working, leadership, project management, or anything else that you feel might fit your career development, or quite frankly, anything else that actually you just happen to be interested in. You can train through short courses, part-time or full-time, perhaps even an MBA or MSc. In fact, I teach on an MSc in Engineering Leadership at Aston University. Learning is not just about education, though. Also think about taking on roles that would develop you and your skills, either at work or outside. There's no better way to learn about how to do things than to do it. For example, most of us can only make so much progress learning a language in a classroom. To make real progress, you have to be using it every day in an environment where it is all around you. That applies to other learning too. So if you can't get the opportunity at work to develop those skills or gain those experiences, think about other ways of achieving it. Perhaps you might volunteer to help in an organization, a charitable organization or some other form, and as a result, gain those experiences and develop those skills through that sort of approach. Remember, use it, practice and develop your skills. As an engineer, continuing professional development is becoming more formalized. To be honest, it was always expected of professionals in any sphere, but you're now expected to track and record it in a much more formal way. In my view, you should see it not as a chore, but as an opportunity to add structure to what most of you are already doing. The typical cycle involves goal setting, benchmarking, planning, recording, and reviewing. When you start to look at it in that way, you'll probably be surprised how much you're already doing. But this approach helps you recognize the opportunities that are in front of you and understand how valuable these things are to your personal and professional development. There are lots of things that count towards CPD: publishing papers, attending seminars or courses, through to volunteering or even reading PE magazine. Also, the institution has a tool that you can use to help you through the process. This is called Career Developer, and I recommend you consider exploring it. To find out more, check it out on the IMechE website. People management. This is the hardest thing that you will ever do. Most people don't like conflict and often don't deal with people issues very well. My advice is behave consistently. Be as open and honest as possible. Address issues directly, quickly, and factually. Absolutely never abuse your position of power. That having been said, I would say take every opportunity to manage or lead people. It is difficult. It's the most difficult thing you can do, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And only through doing it can you develop the skills to be able to lead a team and drive that team forward with a common view of the future, and for that team to then become successful and make a difference. A team of people don't have to report to you on an organisation chart for you to be able to lead them. And it's often in those circumstances that you end up developing your most effective skills. Project management is another area. This is a great transition for engineers, and many senior people have broadened out their careers through project management. These roles are often very visible. That means the stakes can be high, but the upside can be substantial. These roles are often an opportunity to manage people, although sometimes not directly, and they are definitely an opportunity to shine with a can-do attitude. But it's not as straightforward as it seems. Don't forget, not everybody's transparent about what they are really doing. This quote from Colin Gowtry is worth bearing in mind. Project management. The purpose of projects is to manipulate the power balance in the host organisation, often under the guise of legitimate activity. That's not how most of us see what a project is. But actually, that makes you look at it from a slightly different perspective, and it's worth bearing in mind, as opposed to it being a series of tasks that lead to a deterministic outcome. It's actually much more an interactive journey with a number of key stakeholders, and the stakeholders are important in that. As I say, this quote is worth bearing in mind. Much of the time, people behave in a straightforward and predictable manner. But if your project threatens something that they hold dear, then their reaction can be unpredictable and potentially very damaging. If things are happening that don't seem to make sense, then you need to start looking for the underlying reasons. Don't assume that you're right and they're wrong. You need to understand, you need to try and understand where they're coming from. Only then can you try and find a solution. This is probably my favourite slide. And it's surprising for an engineer to be saying this, but ignore accounting and finance at your peril. Everything you've ever worked on is there because some accountant somewhere has said that it was financially sensible to do. Understand how they evaluate activities, how they do their sums, how returns can be created. That can help you turn your ideas into reality in the business world. The most fantastic technical idea will go nowhere without a decent business case. And some great ideas have failed, not because the business case is not there, but the case was never put together properly. If you want to run a business, you have to understand the financial side of things, and I would strongly recommend not listening to accountants. Some of the measures, if taken in isolation, can suggest that you take exactly the wrong action. You need to understand the dynamics behind the numbers. Otherwise, it's like driving a car by looking through the rear-view mirror. Engineers are really well placed to understand accounts. Engineers are highly numerate and logical, and there are many ways that you can get exposed to accounting. For most engineers, the starting place is often exploring your local management accounts, understanding how things are measured, what are the targets, and which of those targets are connected to managers' bonuses can help you see more clearly why many decisions are made. Many of you will not be exposed to statutory accounts unless you become very senior or operate in the world of mergers and acquisitions. But again, if you're thinking of joining a company, the publicly available information is likely to be their management accounts. Have a read through it. You can often tell quite a lot about the culture and the nature of the company through the published statutory accounts and the associated documentation that goes with that tells you about what the company's done last year and what its plans for the future are. Seize the opportunity. Life cannot be completely planned, so don't try. Have a plan, absolutely, but take the opportunities that present themselves. Then take a step back and think broadly. Don't be too narrow. It's really easy for you to dismiss something really, really quickly as, no, I don't want to do that, without thinking about what benefits that can give to you. You don't need to know how you will be able to make something happen before you know that you can make it happen. If you approach everything with enthusiasm and a can-do attitude, you will stand out. So that's the end of my input directly to you, but this is an opportunity for you to challenge me, put me on the spot, and learn something more. Don't be shy. If you have unanswered questions, please feel free to join me on LinkedIn at the management group -IMAKE, or email me, ian.joesbury@gmail.com. Okay, thank you. So let's start with our first question. The first question, it's a question I get quite often actually, is how do I deal with a difficult manager? This is something that many people experience in their career. In fact, I'd say probably all people experience in their career at some point. And so the first thing I'd say is, don't take it personal. There are often circumstances, stress related to the role, etc., things coming together in a certain way that create tension. So don't assume it's a personal issue. Take a step back. Often conflict between an employee and a manager is about communication. Either they don't understand what you do, or you don't understand what drives them. So you can start by trying to understand what drives them. Very often, they are driven by the metrics. So how they're measured, and how they're measured, particularly in modern businesses, very much translates to how they're rewarded, because their bonuses are normally very much tied to those measures. So if you can understand what drives that, and as a result tailor how you're operating to make them successful, then that will often work. The other thing is make sure that they understand what you're doing. So share with them the activities that you do. Don't assume that they know automatically that's exactly what's going on in your part of the business, and share with them the reasons why you make various decisions as you go along. So we've got another question here, which is about, so is there any specific advice you'd give to those following the SRS route to chartership? I suppose, for me, becoming chartered was a really important part of my career. It kind of underpinned my view of myself as an engineer, and therefore it allowed me to think about going on to doing other things that perhaps weren't directly engineering, but perhaps had a lot more associated with business leadership or managing people, without feeling that as a consequence I was leaving my engineering heritage behind. So I do think it's absolutely well worth doing. It doesn't necessarily make any fundamental difference to your salary, etc. But I think it's a really important underpinning, and the professionalism in our industry is driven by the fact that we've got a cadre of chartered engineers. I can't comment specifically about the SRS route, but I hope that's helpful. Have there been any significant events, good or bad, which you've learnt a lot from? Um, so yes, absolutely, and I have to tell you that the things I've learned a lot from have really been the bad ones. If you've got it all right, if it's all working really well, actually you're unlikely to learn from things. If you find yourself in the middle of a really difficult environment, then that is the time that you learn an awful lot. And so again, what I'd say is, under those circumstances, take a step back. You may not have had anything to do with the circumstances that's led to the difficulty, but very quickly, if you're leading an activity, you may find yourself as the focal for a lot of the challenge and the difficulty. Again, don't take it personally. Take a step back and put together a plan that will work your way through it. There are intense levels of noise in difficult areas. What you have to do, I think, is to make sure that you are demonstrating that you're listening, that you're putting in place actions to control and improve the activity, that you can give people a forecast about what the future looks like and what sort of timescale that takes. And don't be worried about asking for help, asking for additional resource to be pulled in. Often you don't have to do it all yourself, and bringing someone else in to work with you, to support you in that process, can make a massive difference. With the increase of people changing jobs through their career lives, any advice on when to start looking for the next move? Also, with digital media, do you think we'll have more startup engineering groups? Actually, the working world has definitely changed since I started. When I started my career, a lot of my colleagues, myself and a lot of my colleagues, went into roles that pretty much, you joined a company and then quite a long time afterwards you retired from that company, and that was your career, and you'd build it up in one company such as Ford or ICI or someone like that. I think actually it's a much more dynamic environment now, and I think for me that's a really positive thing. In my view, in terms of timing for moving on, I believe you've got to be able to talk about what have you achieved in the role that you've done or in the company that you're in today before you really start thinking about moving on. So in my experience, it takes kind of a minimum of 2 to 3 years to really put something in place, make a difference, and then see the results of those activities. So try not to bounce around too often, because then there's a challenge about whether you'll be seen as being sort of robust enough and able to sort of stick the course. But there's also a benefit in staying with your company perhaps a little bit longer, because in my career I've done quite a lot of different things. It's very, very hard to move to a new company and do a different thing in that new company. It's a lot easier to develop a reputation in the company that you're in so that people respect you as an individual, understand your capabilities, and then while you're there, then move into a new area to develop new skills, because you're kind of halfway there with the fact that they understand you in the first place, and there's a consequence. They'll give you those opportunities. If you try and apply for jobs that are very different to what you've done in the past into external companies, they often won't consider you because they really want people that have done this before. But once they know you within a company, that's worthwhile. I mean, on average, I guess I've stayed in a company about 8 years, and that suited me. But I know a lot of people that have stayed in companies for a very, very long time, just gone from one role to another generally more senior role, and that's wholly credible as well. You've got to work out what really fits for you as a person, and then go with that. For me, I naturally knew when it was time to move on. The next question is, I was just wondering how you balance opportunities with your family commitments. I can't really travel and I'm worried about missing out on exciting opportunities. Do you have any advice on how to counter this? Should you be upfront with what you can do, but also what you can't? So my view on this is, I think it's always best to be straightforward. It's a personal view. Not everyone agrees, but I definitely think it's important to be straightforward. If you are in a role, move into a role, via promotion or recruitment, and they're expecting you to do a lot of travel, and after 3 months of being there, you turn around and say, "Oh well, I can't really travel." Now that's a real challenge. So it's much better to put those things up front, cautiously. I mean, don't try not to be too black and white and say, I can never, will never travel, as an example. Hopefully that's not, in reality, you may start with a view that you can't travel at all, but in reality, often you find ways of being able to do it. But I would be straightforward, because if you're straightforward, then the company that you're working with can plan around it. But if you drop a surprise on them, then that could cause them big difficulties, and that could cause issues in your career as you move forward. The other thing about the implicit in that was really kind of work-life balance, and I'm very sorry, but I've been unable to ever get the right balance there. In my experience, I'm either ridiculously flat out, and the family really has to gets attention when I'm able to, which is a real challenge. I mean, I really work hard to make sure that they get attention, when I'm home, and at weekends and all that sort of thing. But I've found it really difficult to get that balance right. So you're either totally flat out, or things are really, really quiet. You can put time and attention into the family, but actually counterbalancing that, it can be a little bit boring at work under those circumstances. So I think you've got to take your own judgments, work out what works for you. Personally, I've never been able to get it right, and so don't beat yourself up if you fail to get it right, because you will certainly not be the only person. So another question, which is, would you recommend being sponsored by a company when it comes to studying an MBA? So the answer there, I think, depends a lot on whether you intend to stay with that company. I mean, I was at ICI when I left to do my MBA, and one of the reasons for me doing the MBA was in order to change careers. I wanted to having underlined my chartered engineer status and having done sufficient engineering roles to show my credibility, I wanted to move on to business roles. And although there were opportunities in ICI for business, I really wanted to broaden myself out. So I resigned from ICI, paid for my MBA myself, and at the end of it, embarked on basically a milk round, the sort of thing that you have at the end of a first university degree, where there were lots of opportunities to talk to potential people to start a new career. So for me, that was right. It's very often if you're sponsored, you're doing it as a part-time course. So you might be doing several weekends a month. That is great from a financial perspective. It's really good from an experience perspective, because you're working while you are going through your different modules, and so while you're studying your module and thinking about it, you're also thinking about how you apply it in your work environment. So that's really, really good. What I would say is it's also incredibly demanding for anyone to do it. So I chose full-time, and that, to be honest, that was a lot easier in terms of personal demand than doing it as a course in parallel with working. But there are lots of benefits with doing it as a course in parallel with working. So again, for me, it was the right thing to resign and do it under my own steam and use it as a break point. for lots of people, they get enormous value out of doing it as sponsored by their company, and can apply the things that they learn directly into that. Next question is, what makes a CV stand out for you with respect to presentation and content? So there are lots of standards. If you go onto the internet, there are lots of standards for CVs. I look for something that's a couple of pages long only, because most recruiters have got limited time. They don't want to spend their time reading through a 5-page CV. And the things that I look out for are, first of all, I look out for the sort of content. I don't just want a list of what jobs you've done and what those responsibilities were. What I'm really interested in are those people that make decisions, take ownership for those decisions, and implement them and make them work. So I'm looking for examples of where you've had an impact, the fact that you worked in that environment, improved that environment in one way or another, whether it's improved the profitability, whether it's improved the efficiency, etc. And I'm keen to see your contribution to that. That needs to jump out of the page at me, and then I'll immediately want to read the rest of the CV. The other thing I'd say is just make sure it looks neat and tidy. Get someone else to double check to make sure there aren't any spelling mistakes. Lots and lots of CVs I see these days are from very good people, have got quite a lot of spelling mistakes, and it may seem like a really trivial thing, but it sends the wrong message. And sometimes I know people that if they see spelling mistakes, they won't actually go any further with that CV. May be extreme, but if you're getting maybe 200 CVs for a job, and 50 of them are capable, then don't give them any reason to discard your CV. So for a chartered individual, do you recommend doing APM and Prince 2 qualifications? Who is it best suited for, and what are the main benefits for each in your opinion? In general terms, I do think it's a good idea to underpin your experience with qualifications, and there are two reasons for that. First of all, in job searching, it makes it clear that these are areas that you've got proper experience in. And the other thing is that actually in the process of doing a proper qualification, underpinning that experience, then you will actually find that you learn a lot in the process, because there's a structured approach around getting those qualifications, and you'll find that there are lots of things that perhaps you haven't yet come across, even though you might be quite well experienced in that area. And doing the qualification will help to round things off. It'll also help to very often to introduce you to a bunch of other people that are going through some very, very similar experiences. And so you can use that as a way of creating a network of people that you stay in touch with, who you can talk about, share things. If you're struggling with something, you can talk to them about it. If they're struggling on something, they can talk to it about you. It's very hard for me to say which particular one is the best one, because it all depends on your individual circumstances. So I can't give a recommendation specifically. All I'd say is it is worthwhile underpinning it with proper certification of some form or another. So the next question is, as a student with a year left till I finish my Masters, what would you say is the most important skill to work on to get a competitive advantage? Is pursuing knowledge in machine learning a good idea? I think the whole area of artificial intelligence, and which will develop out of machine learning, is going to be phenomenally important. And I think that in connection with robotics and automation will be and the sort of data analysis and software skills, etc., associated with it will be an enormously important area. But again, it depends a lot on your personal interests. I would generally say that take sensible decisions about what technical areas you might want to follow, but make sure that it's something that you have got a personal interest in. So I've always found that those topic areas that I'm just interested in, I find I learn and absorb much more rapidly. If I'm trying to wade my way through something that I'm not finding very exciting, it's a lot harder. But if I've got a personal interest in it, then I find I absorb it quicker, I become better at it more rapidly, and I'm just so much more excited by it, and therefore, as a consequence, if I'm talking to someone about it in an interview or just generally in a conversation, I'm much more animated about it, and it comes across so much more powerfully. So I think the area that you talked about is a really important area. I definitely wouldn't discourage you from working in that area, but make sure it's something that you find exciting. Question: did you ever experience some kind of derailment in your career, and how did you get back on track? That's a really good question, and if we're honest, very few people at my stage of career can honestly say no to that question. I've had two real hiccups in my career. One of which was when the company was taken over by an American company. They brought in new management with very different views. It was a very high-tech environment with very long-term perspectives on things, and the person that came in, to my mind, was very, very short-term, and was emphasising the wrong things within the business. So quite a lot of conflict was generated as a result of that, and in the end, I left that business, and it took a little bit of a while to sort of reassess things and get back on with my career. But actually, if you'd asked me, would I rather that didn't happen? The answer would be no. It was quite a painful experience for me at the time, but I'm pleased it happened. I learned a lot from it, and there's an emotional journey that you go through in those things. So what I'd say is, don't expect to be able to just blink an eye and move on. You've got to go through sort of an emotional turmoil if you're in a really, really difficult situation and your career has been derailed. But those things are very temporary in the scale of things. It might be weeks or months, but in reality, you settle down, you get your head around it, and then you focus on actually what your skills are and what your capabilities are, and you put yourself back out there again. And once you get back into the environment, get the first role again after that, you suddenly start to realize actually that there's lots of things you're really good at, and you rebuild confidence, you rebuild the capability, and you push on, and 12 months later, it's like nothing ever really happened. So don't worry if that happens in your career. It pretty much happens in everyone's career. The key is, again, not to take it too personally, just accept it as a reality, then concentrate on the positives that you can put in place to move forward afterwards. And it's very straightforward to rebuild your career afterwards, after a hiccup. You just put yourself out there, and what I'd say is use your contacts. You might feel embarrassed about it, but the people that know you are most likely to help you into your next role under those circumstances. So don't be embarrassed about talking to people. You don't have to be asking them directly for a job, but just talk to people, communicate with them, put yourselves out there. Don't just lock yourself in a room and write 1,000 CVs and send them off to recruitment consultants. I can guarantee that won't get you your next opportunity. Ringing everyone that you know, having coffee with them, talking to them, finding out what's happening in their business. That's the best process to try and re-engage. So next question is, how do you think we can make our profession of interest to a more diverse workforce? Other institutions have a lead for diversity and inclusion. Is this something the IMechE is actively involved with? So, first of all, I think having a broad base to a team is really valuable. If I go back to when I did my MBA, I remember the first project group I worked in on the MBA had people from a wide variety of different backgrounds, and some very, very different people to me, and I was quite honestly amazed of the quality of the output that we got as a result of working as a team. But that did mean that we had to work really hard to not dismiss each other's points of view. So some people are very numerically focused. Some people are very people skills focused. The best outcome is when you sort of put all those things together, and I think that is the same across businesses and industries. And so when you've got a broad-based team of young and old, of different ethnic backgrounds, of male and female, all of those things I think need to be encouraged, and I think we have to take every opportunity to expand that. So I'm very supportive of having a sort of a proactive approach to diversity. I think we need to do more of that, and probably one of the biggest challenges for us is not that people are actively discriminating against one group or another. It's just that they actually don't recognise that they're not seeing. They're kind of almost caricaturing what the person that should look like in that role, without trying to discriminate against someone, and they don't really realise that they can bring on board people with much different backgrounds that can be very, very successful in those roles, but might take quite a different approach to it. So I think diversity training should be in the core of any company, and it should be in the core of the activities of the IMechE to make sure that we are promoting things in the right way. And I think we need to publicise that. And one of the best ways of encouraging these things is to make sure that you really publicise when a successful team has achieved things, and publicise the diversity within those teams. So, next question. How can a person utilise international work experience within the UK? What kind of companies should be sought out to utilise these new skills? So, I'm not quite sure I'm understanding that question properly. So if you want to gain international experience while in the UK, then I think you need to be looking for sort of a multinational organisation, ideally. Join it in the UK, and then position yourself to get transferred out. If you're looking at bringing international experience into the UK, then I think what you've got to be looking for is organisations that are open to that and value the skills that you bring in that area. And so again, what I'd look at organisations that when you look at the people that are in those organisations already have a varied and diverse background with international experience. They already recognise, by definition, the value that that experience brings to their organisation. So I'd research them on the internet and through other routes, and also through friends and connections to find out which companies are of that sort of nature, because they're likely to be open to the skill base that you bring. Do you think that LinkedIn is an important tool for career development and finding opportunities? Actually, I think it's a massively valuable tool. And the reason I think it's important is because the single most valuable thing that you've got going for you in terms of developing your career is your network, is the group of people that you know that either through work experience or even friends in terms of connections. It's almost it's not fair to say it's not about what you know, but who you know is incredibly valuable. And if you know a lot of people, are well connected with them, stay in touch, invest in that, then you can maximize the effectiveness, if you like, of your capability. So if a lot of people know how good you are, that you're really good at this, and that you've got massive experience there, then your career will be amplified by how big your network is. And it's really, probably, it's the single thing I'd recommend investing most in, is spending time with, on your network, making sure that you don't lose touch with people that you've worked with. And LinkedIn is a fabulous tool for doing that. I've used it to reconnect with people that I worked with literally decades ago, and it's very valuable. And if you're at the beginning of your career, what I say is really actively work your network. It is the most powerful thing that you've got, and it's the one thing that I would revisit in my career is how hard I'd worked on my network. As an engineer, it's very easy for us to think about things rather than people, and as a consequence, we often don't put in the effort that is really worthwhile on the people side of things. Work on your network. It absolutely will be well. It'll reward you, tens or hundreds of times over. So, have MBAs lost their value? It was highly recognised previously. A few people that had training. Now it seems it might not be worth it anymore, considering the time, money, and personal investment. I think that's a very fair point. When I did mine, there were fewer MBAs about, fewer people graduating with MBAs, and it was really seen as a vehicle for making a transition. Now I think it's much more common, and does not add as much value as I think as it used to do. On the other hand, quite honestly, they're much more expensive, and therefore you're investing a lot more money in getting it. So the balance is a bit different. So I would say you need to be you need to think about what are you trying to get out of it. I mean, it is something that definitely adds to your skill base. It definitely adds to your knowledge base. And I found, although I found it quite demanding, I certainly found it enjoyable and worth doing. But I think you've got to do your own sort of cost-benefit equation to decide whether it's right for you. The other thing I'd say is there are lots of other things that are not MBAs now that are not necessarily as expensive as an MBA, but will give you quite very similar experience or very similar learning. And so look at the other alternatives that might be leadership or development related. As an example, so there's an MSc in engineering leadership at Aston University, which I teach on. That covers a lot of the areas that were relevant to my business experience, and working along with companies that are putting their own people onto those courses, it means that the academic input there is very relevant. So MBA is not the only thing to do, but you definitely need to do your cost-benefit analysis. It's a big investment. You need to decide whether it's worth it, and it's not as straightforward a question as it used to be, I think. How do you include environmental sustainability in your personal professional development? Well, I think these days in business, it's an area that's much more important. Again, if I think about when I started my career, I think I probably would not have heard about it at all at the beginning of my career as an engineer. And these days, it's really quite central to a lot of areas. If we think about designing new cars, new aircraft, all chemical plants, etc., we're now looking much more at the whole life of those systems and the disposability, the reusability, how we make sure that as a consequence of its use, we're minimizing the impact on the environment, and how do we improve that over time. So I actually think there are lots of opportunities for you to concentrate on that in terms of your personal development. There'll be plenty of courses out there, but there's also a lot of stuff out on the internet, so you can do individual research. But I'd also say, look to your company and see what are the areas that they're focusing on, and see if you can get engaged and involved in their activity as well, because it makes it more real when you're looking at a real issue that a real company has to engage with. So, what to say to a friend who's not happy in their career because they do not see progression in the company, and how do you get back from that? Again, it's difficult. The first thing I'd say is make sure that they've tried hard to engage properly. Make sure that they've reached out. They've thought about what drives the company that they're working in, what drives their manager, and that they've tried to work in a way that makes the company, their manager, and themselves successful. But if ultimately they're just in the wrong place, then the best advice you can give them is to take a step back and look elsewhere. Cultural fit is really important in companies. And if you might be immensely capable, but if you're in a company where your approach, your perspective on life is not aligned to the company that you're in, then it can be a very, very uncomfortable place and very painful. We spend most of our lives working, and we might as well enjoy it. And in the current world, actually, there are lots and lots of different companies out there. So if this one doesn't fit, my advice is don't worry too much about it. Just lift your head up, find somewhere else to go. Ideally, from an economics perspective, find a new role before you resign from the current one. Otherwise, sometimes you might find yourself in a slightly difficult position for a while. But that's not always possible. If it's really bad and you really just feel you need to go, then I'd say bite the bullet and then focus all your efforts on finding something new. Don't stay somewhere that you're not enjoying and you can see no prospect of that changing. What are the chances of becoming chartered, working for a small firm on small projects? There's absolutely no constraint on your ability to become chartered under those circumstances. You don't have to be working on enormous projects. You just have to be working. You just have to demonstrate over a period of time that the quality of your input, that the types of activities that you're doing are consistent with a chartered engineer status. What I'd say is there's a really good network of support within the IMechE to help people understand what's required and to work with them to help them achieve the standards. So contact the institution. Ideally find a mentor, if possible, within the institution, and they can walk you through the process to become a chartered engineer. But just because you're in a small company doing small projects, that's absolutely not a limitation at all. Don't let that put you off. I'm afraid I've been rabbiting on for a very long time. We've come to the end of our slot. I would thank you everyone for the questions. We've had some very wide-ranging questions, and it's been very interesting for me to hear them, and I hope that some of the answers have been useful to you. I would say again, don't forget that the management group has got a LinkedIn group. So if you look that up on the internet, you'd be more than welcome to join it. And then if you've got questions, you can raise them at that LinkedIn group. If there are questions I've been unable to answer, again, feel free to drop me an email directly at ian.joesbury@gmail.com, and I'll do my very best to answer. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you tune into further management group webinars and other webinars from the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. Thank you.